Think you can train a cat to sit or stay like you do with dogs?
Cats are very trainable.
Author Jonathan B. Losos dispels that myth and others and shares the best way to train your cat. It's Julie from HEC Books, where authors take us behind the pages of their bestsellers and into their writing world. If this is your first time here, click the subscribe button. Now here's cat lover Jonathan B. Losos. Don't miss the end when Jonathan talks about how domestic cat groups are very similar to a lion pride, except in one way. It's really cool that your book dedicated to your dad. He gave you your love of cats.
Yes. Well, the story behind that is my dad grew up with cats himself. He loved cats. He would tell everyone that he thought that either in a previous life or the next life, he was a jaguar. And so he loved going to see the jaguars at the zoo. Anyway, when I was 5, I went with my mother to the Animal Protective Association, which is on Hanley Road here in St. Louis, and we adopted a stray Siamese cat. And it was for my dad's birthday. And so we brought the cat home. I still remember this. One of my earliest memories, we're in the kitchen, and it was a rainy day, and so my dad came in through the garage, and he came in the door, and the cat, I was trying to hide the cat behind my legs, my little skinny little boy, 5-year-old legs.
Right.
But the cat started meowing, and so gave away the surprise. So that's when we got Tammy, our first cat, Tammy Rami Glinda cat Losos. And 2 years later, we adopted another shelter cat, and ever since, I've been crazy about cats.
Tammy Rami Glinda cat Losos.
Yes.
Now that's a good cat name.
Tammy
right
was
there.
my summer camp counselor.
Oh.
Rami rhymed with Tammy. Glinda was the other counselor, so it was only fair that they both.
Right. I was like Glinda the Good Witch.
Well,
was
maybe
from
that's why
Wizard
she
of Oz.
was. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And of course, Cat to distinguish them from the human members of the family.
I love that. Before we talk about the fact that you are from St. Louis, which is super cool, I also thought it was cool that your sister adopts black cats.
Yes, she does.
What a great lady.
Yes. Black cats have a hard row in life.
They do. So do black dogs. I didn't realize that black cats had the same issues.
I didn't know that black dogs had the same
They have
issues.
a hard time getting adopted in shelters.
Well, you know, the story on black cats is that they were persecuted in the Middle Ages because people thought that they were either the witch's familiar, sidekick, or maybe a witch herself had transformed into a cat. And so they just brutally killed all the black cats and lots of other cats as well.
Crazy.
And there is some belief, it's not proven, that the black plagues of medieval times may have been a result because they got rid of all their cats, the rat population exploded, and the black plague is transmitted by fleas on rats. And so that may have been a consequence of that massacre of cats.
Well, I always try to tell people black cats are good luck, especially on Friday the 13th.
There you go.
They're amazing.
Agreed.
Everybody needs a black cat.
True.
Okay, so you are from St. Louis, which is really cool because a lot of times we have authors, come to town from different places, but you're from here.
I am. It's true.
I love that. And you work at WashU.
Correct. I'm a professor there.
And that's where you teach your class that people can take. Is it a WashU class, The
Yes.
Science of Cats?
Yes, exactly.
Is that a well-received class? It would be fun to take if I was there.
Well, I've taught it twice. The
Okay.
first, I was at Harvard for a number of years before coming back. I was at WashU, then I moved to Harvard, then I've come back. I taught it for the first time at Harvard, and then I taught it again just this past semester. So I can't tell you if it was well received because we're just finishing the first semester, but the students seem to have liked it. They're writing their term papers now, and I hope to teach it again, next year.
I was surprised to see that 85% of cats are mutts.
Yes.
And only 50% of dogs are mutts.
That's correct. That purebreds, if you will, or we call them pedigreed now, are much more common in the dog world than in the cat world. And another thing, in the United States, even mutts, if you will, usually have pedigreed dogs as their ancestors, that they are a mix of several different breeds. Mm-hmm. That is not true of cats. Most cats have never had a pedigreed ancestor. They've been mutts all the way back through their ancestry.
Was this book on your mind for a long time? Or were you just kind of like, I think I'm going to write a book about cats?
Well, it was, the way it happened is this. Number one, I've always liked writing. And as I told you about 10 years ago, I discovered there was all this science about cats. And the first time I taught this class. And at the same time, I finally decided to write a book about evolution, which is what I do my research on. And it was about how evolution occurs. And I really enjoyed writing this book. It was just so much fun to try to take the science and present it in a way that people would be interested in it. It's not rocket science. I could explain it, but could I make it interesting? That was the real challenge. And so I really enjoyed doing that. And just as I was wrapping up that book, I taught the class on cats. And, the next step was obvious. Well, I'd like to write another book. This thing on cats is doing well. Let's write a book on cats. And so that's how it came to be. Can I just say one more thing about that?
Yeah, please do.
One of the most fun things about the first book and this book has been getting to know some of the scientists whose research I talk about in the book. And I would contact people, and they would be just incredibly generous in telling me the story behind their research. What happened in the study that doesn't get into the scientific paper, all the things that went wrong, all the fails, and all the crazy twists and turns that led them to the paper they actually published. And even more generally, how did they become a cat scientist? Nobody that I talked to started out saying, I think I'm going to study cats, that they wanted to study cancer or human behavior or something, and just one twist led to another, and they ended up studying cats. And so the great stories, and people were so kind with their time, and then I had fun trying to, be a journalist essentially and tell their stories. And that's one of the parts I've enjoyed the most about writing these books.
How do you become a cat scientist?
Well, I feature a number of scientists in the book, as you know.
Right.
There is one woman who initially wanted to cure cancer. And actually, she wanted to cure muscular dystrophy, having watched the Jerry Lewis telethon. And so she went to graduate school to learn genetics and to learn, how you do research on human diseases. And then at some point, she transferred over to studying animal diseases. She saw that it could transfer over and that the field was a little more open. And then the FBI had started a CSI animals lab.
Oh.
And she applied for it. And if she had gotten it, she would have probably done that the rest of her life. But the FBI stupidly didn't hire her. And she ended up being the world's leading authority on cat genetics. And she has found all of these mutations that cause cat diseases and have come up ways to solve them. And so that's one answer.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's just these quirky things. People don't intend to do that. I mean, now I think where cat science has matured, I think people perhaps do want to do that from the outset. But the people in my book, none of them started out that way.
You have so much information about cats in this book. Was there anything that really stood out to you that surprised you the most?
Well, there were a bunch of things. One I've mentioned already, that the cats don't meow to each other. Another fact is that, and this is pertinent to my own cats, so I've got two of my older cats, Winston and Jane, are litter mates. And their mother was a stray cat that was run over and killed, sadly. And somehow somebody knew that she had just had kittens, and they went and rescued the kittens and raised them up, and then we adopted them 4 months later. But the point is, they're in the same litter. They look nothing alike. Winston is a really big cat. He's really muscular. He's black, gray and white. And Jane is petite and slate gray. And it's like, how can these be brother and sister? Well, I think I found out the answer. It turns out that free-ranging cats, females, when they're in estrus, when they're reproductively receptive, will mate with lots of different males. They will copulate 20 times a day, sometimes for 4 or 5 days on end, with many different males. And so it is quite common for litter mates to have different fathers. And
wow.
I would bet a lot that that's the explanation for Jane and Winston looking so different.
So genetically, there's a way to have different babies in your stomach from different dads?
Well, basically, not to get into too many of the gory details,
right.
But the female mates with a number of males and has the sperm from them, and they're floating around, and
wow.
One male sperm fertilizes one egg, and another male sperm fertilizes another egg.
That is bizarre.
Exactly. Or here's a perhaps just more of a fun fact.
Love it.
People claim that there are a lot of myths about cats we should talk about, but people claim that if you died in your house, your cat would eat you. Turns out, and if they're locked in and no one discovered you, turns out dogs do it much more often. So
really?
You better beware, or maybe
I
won't
will
matter.
be careful. Dang.
Yeah,
okay.
There is a small literature on this, and there are many more examples of that happening with dogs than with cats.
That's kind of fun. Any other myths that you have about cats that you've learned?
Two myths that are, kind of important ones. One is, people think that cats can't be trained. Absolutely wrong. Cats are very trainable. There are books, there are websites, and all kinds of things. It's the same way you train any other animal. And it turns out that cats are very food-focused. So they're very trainable. And you can train them to do all kinds of things, and there's videos online. But there's this wonderful group I saw called the Savitsky cats that were on America's Got Talent, and they have shows all the time. The things they train cats to do are astonishing. So they're very trainable, including you can train a cat to use the toilet. And so you don't need kitty litter.
What?
I've never heard of dogs doing that, but yes,
No.
Yep, you can do that. So cats are very trainable. It's just a myth that they aren't. The other myth is that cats are aloof loners and that they're asocial. And it turns out that that's not necessarily correct either. Now, the standard wisdom is that there is one social species of feline, and that's the lion. The lion lives in prides, and the prides are composed of a lot of females that are related to each other because the females don't disperse when they grow up. They stay in the pride, so the females are all sisters or cousins or whatever. The males leave, and new males come in, unrelated males. That's how lions prevent inbreeding. But all the females are related, and they're very friendly and sociable. They groom each other, they lie on top of each other, they play with each other. They will even nurse each other's cubs, and of course, they hunt together as well. So it's a very social species, and it was long thought that they were essentially the only social species. However, it turns out that colonies of domestic cats, outdoor cats that are unowned, have a very similar social structure to lions. And the way that works is so you have to have a high density of the cats, a lot of them, and that only occurs when there's a lot of food. And that happens when there are people putting out a lot of food for them, as occurs in many places, or on farms, or places like fishing villages where there's a lot of fish scraps that are left. Where there's a lot of food, you get a big cat population, and that cat population will form into a bunch of groups, and each group will be very much like a lion pride. It will be, again, the members of that group will be females that are related, and they're extraordinarily friendly to each other. They lie with each other, they groom, they're just friendly, they nurse each other's kittens. There's even reports of them acting like midwives, one female helping another give birth. And so in those circumstances, cats can be just as social as lions are. In fact, they should be called prides. I don't know why we call them clouders, which is a dumb term if you ask me.
Oh, I've never heard. So that's a group of cats called a clouder.
Yes, and if you look up on the internet, there's contradictory explanations, and I couldn't find out I couldn't get to the bottom of where that term comes from. But they're just like lion prides, except in one way. Lions are famous for hunting cooperatively. They work together very sophisticated ways to capture prey that are much too big for any one lion to bring down on its own. Thankfully, domestic cats don't do that. Imagine a pack of cats, ambushing a groundhog or something, or even bigger. That would be terrifying, but they do not do that. But in really many other ways, domestic cats are very social animals, or they can be in the right circumstances. And one reason people think that they're aloof loners is, remember, those groups are all related cats that grew up with each other. And one scientist basically said the cardinal cat rule is, if you've lived with this cat all your life, be friendly to it. If not, be very wary. So when you put together two cats that didn't grow up together, well, they're not going to be friendly. And so the take-home message is, if you want a couple of cats, get litter mates. And, anyway, so cats
But if you can't do that, it could still work out.
It can work out. It can work out, but also oftentimes it doesn't. Now, sometimes that's because people don't introduce them the right way, but it's a much better bet to get two at the same time.
Interesting. Thanks for watching. Click on part 3 of this interview to find out where in the world cats originated.